Present.
Mrs. Abuzawader,
Present.
Mrs. Hightower,
Present.
Mrs. Hoffman,
Present.
Mr. Holston,
Present.
Mr. Outling,
Present.
and Dr. Wells.
Present.
And Mrs.
This is
Thurm.
Tammy Thurm. I'm also here.
Yeah, that's what I just said, Mrs. Thurm. So we are all in attendance. We will begin tonight's meeting with a moment of silence. Thank you. Dr. Wells, could you lead us in the pledge?
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Tonight's meeting continues with a partial opening of the council chamber with a continued option to participate virtually. Due to capacity restrictions, a limited number of residents are allowed inside the council chamber for specific items of interest. Following the conclusion of items or topic for discussion, residents will be asked to exit to allow room for other residents to enter the chamber. Staff and residents are requested to continue to wear face coverings. Public forum and agenda item speakers have two options: to register to speak before council. Residents may continue to register via the JOT form on the city website by 5 p.m. the day prior to the council meeting, or residents may sign up to speak by 6 o'clock the day of the meeting by using the Q-Minder kiosk just outside the council chamber door. Please see our community relations manager, Gary Campino, at the courier desk for assistance. To comply with requirements by the state in regards to Zoom meetings and hybrid meetings, and to provide an optimum experience to the public, council will verbalize motions and all votes will be conducted by roll call vote. We do allow and welcome speakers to address council at the public forum meeting. Council respects the right for the public to speak about matters of concern that can be addressed by council. Each speaker will be allotted 3 minutes. Comments that deem to be intended or to incite unlawful behavior will be deemed out of order. Zoom participants are requested to mute their microphones until called upon to speak. The City of Greensboro is committed to promoting an environment that is free of discrimination, bias, and bullying. Thus, harassment, words, jokes, actions, or comments based on an individual's sex, sexual orientation, race, ethnic background, age, religion, physical condition, or other legally protected characteristic will not be tolerated. In order to be considered, written comments must be submitted online through the city's website, www.greensboro-nc.gov. We do have a consent agenda this evening for items F1 through F33, which are a grouping of agenda items that are voted on with one single vote to expedite what are believed to be routine and non-controversial items. Any council member may withdraw an item from the consent agenda due to a conflict of interest or for the purpose of voting no. Items removed from the consent agenda for discussion will be placed on the December City Council business agenda. Tonight's meeting does include closed captioning. Depending on the length of tonight's meeting, we will take a short recess around 7:30. We have carried over the public speaking portion of our meeting from our last meeting because there were some technical difficulties. We can go ahead and line those speakers up at this point. I believe we have. Okay. And all speakers are subject to a 3-minute maximum, and if you would identify yourself as you speak.
Okay, I'll begin. Good evening, council members. Thank you for sharing your time with me. My name is Nicole Gaines. I live at 500 Peach Orchard Drive, Brown Summit. I am currently the North Carolina chair of the Sierra Club, of which we have over 100,000 members in this state. And I'm a former group chair of the Piedmont Plateau Group, here situated in Greensboro. Due to a growing concern about the destruction of thousands and thousands of acres of forest land in Greensboro, some of our members started taking photos of construction sites in early 2018. A few months later, 2 other members started researching the ramifications of clear cutting and grading the land. The results of their research, photos, and life experiences are reflected in the following educational slideshow, which my 4 colleagues and I will now present. Next slide, please. So I highlighted in red, we have logging, surface mining for coal, pipeline construction, wildfires, of course, which can't be helped, catastrophic weather conditions, and highway and housing and commercial development, of which Greensboro, Guilford County has seen much of its share. Next slide, please. Globally, we are deliberately terminating the most awesome splendor of the planet has yet attained. So each year we're destroying a rainforest the size of Oklahoma, and that does not even speak to wood pellets. Immediate action must be taken, for without trees, Earth cannot dispose adequately of the chemical residues and specific to the atmosphere of burning of fossil fuels. Next slide, please. Even though this is an example that's set in Oregon, erosion, soil damage, changes in CO2 levels, loss of health and habitat, and risk of natural disasters and other aesthetic concerns are also some of the things that we are concentrating on. We want to continue making Greensboro the greenest city in the state, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to keep our trees or do so responsibly. I'll let my colleague take over from here. Thank you for your time.
Hello, my name is Dennis Reith. I live at 5918 Arcadia Drive. Been a resident there for 21 years. My perspective, all Greensboro land development is currently based on clear cutting. How do I move it forward? Okay. Locally, the North Carolina Department of Transportation placed Greensboro in high risk of carbon overload when thousands of acres of trees were destroyed during the construction of the urban loop I-840. These photos show clear cutting impact to the northern sector of I-840. North Elm, North Church, North Lawndale, and Lake Jeanette Road overpass were all impacted in the I-840 construction. The southern I-840 was similarly impacted. Clear cutting, grading, and removing all trees, vegetation, wildlife habitats, and topsoil has destroyed numerous acres of forest land and mature trees along each artery into Greensboro. These photos show clear cutting for construction of a strip mall, multifamily housing, a medical facility, and future clear cutting impact on a luxury apartment complex. Some of the city's largest trees and a wildlife sanctuary were destroyed along a 2-mile stretch of Lawndale Drive in 2018-2021 due to the construction of patio homes, office complexes, a storage building, and a 30-acre apartment complex. Many more trees near Lawndale Drive were destroyed for the expansion of the Greensboro Science Center and Zoo, renovations to Country Park, and adjoining parking lots. Again, all Greensboro land development is currently based on clear cutting. Clear cutting impacted hundreds of mature trees along Ridgecrest Drive, former farmland on Friendly Avenue, and a riparian buffer at a nearby stream. This was part of an expansion of a retirement community in 2020. The impact of these photos hit home because it personally restructured our neighborhood. The rezoning from single family R3 to residential multifamily CDRM-5 led to a clear cutting nightmare. Look at the photos, 150 trees removed just on Ridgecrest to create 10 multifamily institutional duplexes. Several hundred trees removed if you add in the farmland and the riparian buffer.
30 seconds.
Clear cutting and grading led to multiple stormwater problems and erosion. Look at the aerial photo of the construction site, the bottom right photo, to see full impact of clear cutting. Bottom line, is clear cutting really the highest and best use for preparation of land for all Greensboro land development? It is time for change. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Karen Katula. I live in Randolph County, but I've worked at UNCG in the Department of Biology as a professor for nearly 30 years. I will be discussing some of the relationships between intact forests and trees and environmental and human health. Globally, carbon dioxide levels reached an all-time high of 415 parts per million in May 2019. This is higher than it's been in the last 3 million years. Human activities have contributed to this increase, including electricity production, transportation, building products, and importantly, deforestation. Cancer, heart disease, upper respiratory illnesses, birth disorders, and viruses are more prevalent in urban areas and industrial zones due to carcinogens from fossil fuel combustion and local pollution. According to the National Cancer Institute, cancer is among the leading cause of death worldwide. And locally, cancer has been the leading cause of death in Guilford County since 2008. 46% of the deaths are from lung cancer. These illnesses and future epidemics can be potentially curtailed by prohibiting clear cutting and enforcing strong emission standards. Trees act as our planet's lungs by taking in carbon and purifying our air. High levels of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere cause climate changes and turbulent weather conditions. Strong winds and heavy rains have destroyed many trees in Greensboro in recent years. Homes, parks, and schools have also been damaged by hurricanes, floods, and tornadoes, as shown in these pictures from Greensboro in 2018. Nationally, deforestation and high carbon emissions have also caused extreme blizzards, mudslides, droughts, wildfires, melting icebergs, rising sea levels, displaced people, and the extinction of species. Aesthetic value is only one of the many benefits of urban forests that are lost during clear cutting and grading the land. Shown here
30 seconds.
from pictures of Greensboro was a wooded neighborhood that was destroyed and clear cut to build a duplex that included only one sapling per duplex. Thank you, and next speaker.
Good afternoon, City Council members. I'm Don Henza. I've been a Greensboro resident for over 20 years, and we moved here because of the excellent schools and the attractive green spaces in town. It's a very attractive community. I've been a member of the Sierra Club for over 30 years before getting involved in the Boy Scouts here in Greensboro. So continuing with the slide, the trees in Greensboro have more than just aesthetic value. They provide carbon storage. They do a lot for urban heat reduction, stormwater absorption, and with increasing property values with a stimulus for economic development. Beginning in 2000, after the publication of the book, The Great Work by Thomas Berry on global environmental crisis, thousands of communities began regulating carbon emissions and caring for their lands and forests. By planting trees, community gardens, pollinating gardens, and ground covers instead of grassy yards that had to be mowed. Also by planting fir trees and hedges along highways and property boundaries instead of building sound barriers and fences. The city of Greensboro has responded in the past by forming a partnership between Greensboro Beautiful and the Neighborhood Woods programs, training volunteers to plant trees in their neighborhoods and parks. But the surge in economic growth beginning in 2016 led to the net destruction of trees in the city. Many cities have made tree conservation part of their city planning. Cities for Forest represents nearly 73 cities with forest plans that includes Raleigh, North Carolina, something we need to see. Other cities are developing tree protection programs, including Charlotte and Durham, North Carolina. And multiple nations just recently pledged to call a moratorium on deforestation by 2030 in a 2029 climate summit in Glasgow. This is a critical time for Greensboro to take steps to protect our mature large growth trees and urban forests. Forests and trees are essential. They provide clean air and water. They definitely cool the air in the summer in the urban
30
environment.
seconds.
They provide oxygenated air and green spaces for residents' well-being. They enrich the soil, create wildlife habitat, and reduce erosion and flooding. Thank you.
I'm Hazel Landers. I live at 2905 New Garden Road East in Greensboro. That's east of Lawndale and Country Park. As you know, we are here to ask you to call a moratorium on clear cutting for development and to save our trees. It's too late to save the trees that are in the photo, plus 60 other mature trees that once grew in Country Park. However, it's not too late to save thousands of other mature trees throughout Greensboro. The Sierra Club's Save Our Trees petition states, the forests of Greensboro are rapidly being destroyed due to urban development. Immediate action must be taken to protect our forest. The 1,000 signers of this petition urge you to take immediate action to enforce a moratorium on clear cutting. That's removing all trees, vegetation, wildlife habitats from forest land or wooded property for housing and commercial development, and to establish standards for developers to build on abandoned or already cleared properties, and to plant trees in the parking lot mediums and hedges around property boundaries. By calling a moratorium, the Sierra Club requests that you call a temporary halt on all clear cutting operations on forest land that's been rezoned or designated for urban development. Such a halt would allow you time to consult with the city arborist and sustainability council, and to meet with the residents who will be most affected by clear cutting operations in their neighborhoods. The Sierra Club also requests that you authorize the Greensboro Planning Department to establish standards for housing and commercial developers to build on abandoned or already cleared properties. The Planning Department has developed impressive citywide tree ordinances with specific requirements for replanting large native trees.
30 seconds.
It's up to you to approve and enforce these ordinances. Please recognize the importance of protecting our trees and our basic human rights. For all of us, including our children and grandchildren, have the right to clean air, clean water, rich soil, and a healthy environment. Let's all work together to keep the green in Greensboro.
Thank you all very much.
I have the petition available, and I would like a response, or we would like a response by the first business
Thank you.
meeting in December.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager, can you do a quick update on our tree ordinance?
I can. I'd prefer to come back with that because we actually have goals associated with planting and canopy protection. And then there were some reference projects in there that are city projects that have specific plans. So I'd prefer to come back with something more comprehensive.
Thank you. If you could do that by email, and we will distribute it to the speakers. Thank you. We will now move on to the consent agenda portion of our agenda.
Move the consent agenda.
Second.
And Madam Mayor Pro Tem, I
Yes.
did tell you I didn't have anything, but I actually do have two that I have a question on. Sorry.
Sharon, are they quick questions? Which two are they?
F29 and F33. And I guess I'm confused on the the two items are unique. One of them is for some type of air system, GPS system at the Coliseum. And the last one, F33, is for a traffic signal loop detector installation. They both are unique and they both are sole source items, but one, F29, says they requested a waiver. Not sure why they would request a waiver. And then the last one didn't request a waiver and went through the MWB process, even though they didn't find anyone to do the work. And in both cases, they didn't find anyone to do the work. I think I'm just concerned that the waivers are being asked for without merit, because if you go through the MWBE program in the office, they don't find anyone to do the work, then certainly, I mean, that has merit. But to ask for a waiver before you know what's happening seems problematic to me. And maybe I just need to understand the clarity around that. And I've seen others ask for waivers in the past.
Mr. Brown, how time sensitive is item number F29?
Well, I think in today's world of COVID, it's certainly a sensitive issue for every patron that comes to any of our facilities. And in actual retrospect, I wish we had addressed all these early when we first did the Tanger Center, we did the Aquatic Center, we did the Field House to meet requirements for the NBA Swarm facility. So this is following up on our commitment to provide an environment for every patron coming in to feel that we've addressed those issues with regard to COVID. The GPS system is installed in every hospital in the country. And we are fortunate that Hoffman, a major manufacturing facility right down the street from the Coliseum, represented this product line, and they self-install the unit. So our information was provided through Mike Perdue, working with Allison Staten, and submitted all the documentation to the MWBE office to verify that there wasn't another opportunity for another MWBE firm that represented this GPS model that is so integral to fighting COVID. So I think they found that there was no such other, and we're very fortunate that Hoffman is available and willing to put us on in front of the queue to get us going to get these products, because they're in high demand and there's a backlog to get these installed in every public facility across the country.
Well, I would say I would like us to move on with this item, especially since it
The
is in
question-
some of our existing.
The question is not the need of the item.
I was not finished speaking.
I hear you, Warren, but I think I was
I
addressing.
am not finished speaking.
And I was not allowed to address his concern. So don't try to cover up.
I am addressing his concern, and we've had these votes
I
before.
asked the
It is-
question, Mayor, for a reason. It was not to stop, to not use the item. The question I asked was around the waiver. Question wasn't around the
Well,
equipment,
the
the need,
que-
none of that. It could
issue-
be, you said a simple question. It was simple. Why a waiver? Not a matter of we didn't need it. I've already heard the presentation.
Well,
and I
Mrs.
support
Hightower,
it.
that-
I
that
just
question-
asked the question.
That question could have been addressed earlier. So, we have this waiver discussion a number of times. It could have been addressed prior to the meeting. We have a number of things on this agenda. I would say that if, Ms. Sowell, if you would reach out and explain those two issues.
Right.
And I think we need to,
Now she got time.
I think we need to move forward with the GPS one. I don't know if the other one is
I
time
didn't say
sensitive.
neither one. I didn't say neither one couldn't be moved forward. I'm gonna vote for both of them. I just asked a question, Mayor.
Well, then let's move on and vote on them, because we say if we're taking something off for discussion, it'll go on the next agenda.
It was a simple question. That's what you said. Simple. It was simple. It got turned into convoluted, unnecessary rhetoric. It was simple.
Excuse me, can I respond to your question?
Yeah.
The process, when we enter something through the MWBE office, and Kim can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way the process is, if it's sole proprietary, we ask for a waiver on those. So that's the process that's currently in place when it's sole proprietary. And that's what this was, and that's the process we went through.
That was a simple question to a simple answer.
And it's the same answer we get every time this comes up.
No, ma'am, it doesn't, because it's two items on the same agenda that are just alike. One is a waiver, one is not.
And
That is
if I
sole
can,
source.
if I can just add, and the difference is the MWBE office searched for vendors for this particular item and found that there were none available. So when there are no vendors available, that is when we use the waiver process. And in the case of the traffic loop detector, there were vendors that we felt like could provide the service. And so we reached out to them to offer the opportunity to bid on it, but no one bid on it. So that's why the waiver did not apply to the traffic loop detectors.
So the difference. Okay, I can accept that.
So do we have a motion for the consent agenda?
I'll move.
So moved by Mrs. Johnson, seconded by
Mr. Holston.
Mr. Holston. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Abuzawader,
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower,
Yeah.
Mrs. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Holston,
Yes.
Mr. Outling,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells. Yes. And that passes 9-0. Item number G1 is a public hearing for a resolution authorizing an economic development incentive to RPM Wood Finishes Group, Inc. in an amount not to exceed $160,729. And staff does have a presentation on this item.
Thank you. So this is about RPM Wood Finishes. We have two economic development projects up for consideration this evening. RPM Wood Finishings Incorporated is a part of an OEM Industrial, which is owned by RPM International Holding Company in Ohio. The company is considering 7625 Thorndike Road for a center of excellence. This facility would provide research and development in specialty coatings and showcase existing product lines. The expansion will result in a capital investment of $19.5 million and 53 new jobs over a 3-year period. The average wages of those jobs is $75,000 to $75,47, and none of those jobs would pay below $15 an hour. The company is requesting a 3-year incentive in the amount of $160,729. The slide here just shows how it meets the minimum criteria to qualify for incentives. 25 jobs over the Guilford County average wage, as you can see, and a minimum of $7 million of investment. Staff recommends that council consider the request to authorize these incentives. You'll note in the attached resolution that the grant would be paid over a 3-year period. The 53 new jobs will be retained through that installment period. The construction portion of this project will adhere to the city's MWBE policy plan, and representatives of the company have already spoken with staff about what will be expected. The new jobs would be posted on our local workforce development board, and they will require to host a job fair in each of the hiring phases. We also have here Mr. Marvin J. Price of the Greensboro Chamber, and also Sharon Nellenbach from the company with us virtually, if you have any questions. Okay.
Move the item. Second. Madam Mayor,
Sorry about that. That was moved by Mrs. Hoffman and seconded by Ms. Abuzawader. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Abuzawader,
yes.
Mrs. Hightower,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Holston, Mr. Outling,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells. Yes. Thank you, and that passes 9-0. And thank you very much for considering an investment in Greensboro and Guilford County. We certainly appreciate the raise in wages, and we look forward to your decision.
Thank you.
Item number G2 is a public hearing for a resolution authorizing an economic development incentive to TAT Piedmont in the amount not to exceed $126,423. We do have a presentation by staff and some speakers for questions.
All right, go ahead and get started. TAT Piedmont, which is also known as Piedmont Aviation Component Service, is a maintenance, repair, and overhaul MRO company. They are considering an expansion at their Greensboro facility or in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And they have 2 other facilities here in North Carolina. The potential expansion would allow them more capacity to service auxiliary power units, which are the power units that power the plane when the engines are not on the runway. The expansion will result in a capital investment of $13.835 million and 85 new jobs over a 4-year period. The average wage, again, of those jobs is $51,706, and none of those jobs would pay below the $15 an hour. The company is requesting a 4-year incentive in the amount of $126,423. And the company is also being considered for an NC Department of Commerce 1NC grant. This slide shows again how the company meets all 3 minimum criteria for our incentive policy. And staff recommends that council consider this request to authorize these incentives. The resolution shows that it would be paid over a 4-year period. The 85 new jobs above the existing employment level will be retained through the end of the installment period. And the construction portion of this project will adhere to the city's MWBE program. Again, the new jobs will be posted to the Workforce Development Board, which will be required to host job fair in their hiring phases. And we have, again, Mr. Marvin J. Price from the Greensboro Chamber here with us. We also have Mr. Sasha Ravens of TAT Piedmont and Mr. in person. And then Mr. Dave Thomas of TAT Piedmont virtually with us. So.
Move the item. Second.
That was moved by Ms. Abuzawader and I believe seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Johnson. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Abuzawader,
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Holston,
Yes.
Mr. Outling,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells.
Yes.
And that passes 9-0. Again, I'd like to say thank you for considering Greensboro and Guilford County on this very important job creation. We appreciate it and we look forward to your considerations. And this was very good 2 items to be able to bring more jobs to our city. And I want to thank our city staff and the chamber for working so well together and bringing this before us. Now move on to item number G3, which is an ordinance for a public hearing for annexation of territory into the corporate limits for property located at 238 Ritters Lake Road.
Move the item.
Um,
presentation.
And item G4, an ordinance for public hearing for original zoning for 238 Ritters Lake Road. We do have speakers in favor. Mike Fox, Williams Development Group, Taylor Williams, Benjamin Hintz, Dion Brown, Mark Snyder, Benjamin Reha, and Allison Bragg. I don't believe we have any speakers in opposition. Mr. Kirkman, can you give us a brief overview of this project?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Vaughn and members of City Council. The request is to annex and establish original zoning for approximately 109 acres on Ritters Lake Road, which is just south of I-85 and off of Elm Eugene Street. The request is to go from County AG and County RS 40 to City Conditional District Light Industrial. North of the request is currently zoned County AG Agricultural and County RS 30 Residential Single Family. East of the request is zoned County AG in conditional use light industrial in the county. South and west is zoned County AG and County RS 40 Residential Single Family. The subject property is currently undeveloped at this time. North of the request are single family dwellings, undeveloped land, and a place of religious assembly. East of the request are single family dwellings and an industrial use. West and south of the request are single family dwellings and undeveloped land. The subject property is currently designated as residential on the comprehensive plan's future land use map and as urban general on built form map. This is the condition that was included with this request that was advertised as part of the hearing this evening. Again, the GSO comprehensive plan does designate the site as urban general within an urban mixed use corridor on our future built form map and both commercial and residential on the future land use map. If the original zoning request is approved, the future land use map then is considered to be amended to the industrial classification to ensure the appropriate fit between the designation and the zoning classification. Staff has concluded this request is consistent with the comprehensive plan's growing economic competitiveness, big idea to build a prosperous and resilient economy, creating equitable opportunities to succeed, and our prioritizing sustainability goal to build economic resilience, expand local economies' ability to withstand and adjust disruptions and changes at the regional, national, and global scales. The proposed CDLI district request allows a variety of warehouse, distribution, and limited manufacturing and assembly uses, which in their normal operations have little or no adverse effect upon adjacent properties. Staff would note that care should be taken with respect to building orientation, materials, height, and visual buffers to ensure appropriate transitions to nearby lower density residential uses. And staff is recommending approval of both the annexation and original zoning request. These requests were heard by the Greensboro Planning and Zoning Commission at their October 18th meeting, and the commission unanimously voted to recommend approval of both items. There were 3 speakers in favor at that hearing and none in opposition. I can answer any questions.
I'd like to second Mrs. Hightower's motion.
So that was item number G3 was moved by Mrs. Hightower and seconded by Ms. Abuzawader. I would like to see if Mr. Fox has anything he'd like to say or his clients.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council. Is this just on the annexation issue? Is that? Yeah, okay. No, I don't have anything to add. I support the staff. Thank you.
You want to speak on the second?
Pardon?
You want to speak on the other piece?
Yes, I would like to say a few words on the other part, if that's okay.
Yes, they're combined.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yes, so thank you. We appreciate your time here tonight. We feel your staff has done a great job. This is a good site for this type of project, warehouse distribution. We had good conversations with the neighborhood, engaged about 15 people, and they had a lot of good questions. Very similar projects along 4085 along this corridor. So this would be a typical of what you have seen for these type of light industrial projects. Staff supports it and has recommended approval, and we got unanimous approval at the zoning commission. So with that, we'll truncate our presentation and ask you to consider approval, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. So the first vote is for the annexation, and that was moved by Mrs. Hightower and seconded by Ms. Abuzawader. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Abuzawader?
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Holston?
Yes.
Mr. Outling?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells.
Move
And
item.
And that passes 9-0.
Move item 6-4. Second. Or G4.
I just have one quick
G4.
question for Mr. Fox. If you want to address.
Yes,
Are-
ma'am.
Are
Ms.
there any
Hightower.
traffic concerns out in that area? Have you all looked at
We-
site and done any work around that?
Yes, ma'am. We have engaged Davenport. John is here tonight if you have particular questions, but he's presented a comprehensive traffic study to both GDOT and NCDOT. And there are a number of recommendations about improvements to be made to handle any anticipated traffic increases. And we're committed to doing those as to what has been recommended by NCDOT and GDOT.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm. Yes, sir.
So the item was moved by Mrs. Johnson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hightower. Mrs. Johnson, that requires a statement of consistency.
The Greensboro City Council believe that its action to approve the zoning request for the property described as 238 Ritter Lake Road from County AG Agricultural and County RS 40 Residential Single Family to City CDLI Conditional District Light Industrial to be consistent with the adopted GSO 2040 Comprehensive Plan and considers the action taken to be reasonable and in the public interest for the following reasons. One, the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan's future build form map and future land use map. And two, the proposed city CDLI zoning districts permit use which fit the context of surrounding areas and limits negative impacts on the surrounding area. And three, the request is reasonable due to the size, physical condition, and other attributes of the area. It will benefit the property owner and surrounding community, and approval is in the public interest.
Thank you. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Busewader?
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Holston?
Yes.
Mr. Outling?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm?
Yes.
And Dr. Wells? Yes. And that passes 9-0. Thank you. I did forget to close the public hearing, but I guess that is automatically closed now that the issue has passed. Item number G5 and G6. G5 is an ordinance for a public hearing for an annexation of territory into the corporate limits for property located at 5670 Millstream Road, 31.688 acres, Williams Development Group LLC. And item G6, an ordinance for a public hearing for original zoning located at 5670 Millstream Road, Dixon Pit for William Development Group LLC. Mr. Kirkman?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Vaughn. Again, the request is to go from County AG Agricultural to City Light Industrial for approximately 31.6 acres. North, south, and west of the request are zoned County Agricultural AG. East of the request is zoned County LI and City LI Light Industrial. Subject property is currently undeveloped. North of the request is the I-40/85 highway, as well as some undeveloped land. East of the request is an existing industrial park and dedicated open space. South and west are undeveloped land and single-family dwelling. This is designated as industrial on the future land use map of the comprehensive plan and also industrial on the future built form map of the comprehensive plan. There are no zoning conditions associated with this request. Staff did conclude that the original zoning does support the comprehensive plan's growing economic competitiveness big idea to build a prosperous, resilient economy that creates equitable opportunities to succeed, and the comprehensive plan's prioritizing sustainability goal to build economic resilience, expand the local economy's ability to withstand and adjust to disruptions and changes at the regional, national, and global scales. Their proposed LI zoning district is intended to accommodate limited manufacturing, wholesaling, warehousing, research and development, and related commercial service activities, which in their normal operations have little or no adverse impact upon adjoining properties. And again, staff would note care can be taken
with respect to building orientation, materials, height, and visual buffers to ensure appropriate transition to adjacent residential uses to the west. And with that, I'll be answering questions. Oh,
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I did note that the Planning and Zoning Commission did consider this case at their October 18th meeting, did unanimously recommend approval of both items. There was one speaker in favor and none in opposition.
Thank you. We do have one speaker for questions, Taylor Williams, or we can have a motion.
I'd like to hear from Mr. Williams.
Good evening, and thank you all for the time and opportunity to be here tonight. As Mayor Vaughn mentioned, we are considering rezoning this property, annexing into the city of Greensboro. We had discussed with city planning and staff to ensure that this was in line with the long-term economic goals of the city. We did a significant traffic impact study to understand the impact of the traffic generation in the local community and feel that this is the highest and best use for that parcel.
Are there any residents close by?
No, not to my knowledge.
Okay, so nobody that would really be impacted by any changes, all industrial out there.
To my knowledge, it's almost exclusively industrial.
So no need to have any kind of community meeting or input. You didn't see a need or
Correct.
nobody to reach out to?
Correct.
Move the item.
Second.
Okay, I'm sorry, who moved the item?
Can we close the public hearing?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Johnson. Do
moved
I have a
it.
second?
I made the motion, Mayor, and Hugh seconded it.
All right, well, we need to close the public hearing.
Right.
Mrs. Johnson moved to close. Do I have a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Public hearing is closed. I believe item number G5 was moved by Mrs. Hoffman and seconded by Mr. Holston.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Busewader,
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Holston,
Yes.
Mr. Outling,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells. And that passes 9-0. Item number G6 does require a statement of consistency. Do I have a motion?
Move the item.
Moved by Mrs. Hightower,
Second, I'm sorry.
seconded by Mrs. Busewader.
The Greensboro City Council believes that its action to recommend approval for the zoning request for the property described as 5670 Mill Stream Road from County AG Agricultural to City LI Light Industrial to be consistent with the adopted GSO 2040 Comprehensive Plan and considers the action taken to be reasonable and in the public interest for the following reasons. Number one, the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, future built form map, and future land use map. The proposed LI zoning district permits uses which fit the context of surrounding area. And three, the request is reasonable due to the size, physical condition, and other attributes of the area. It will benefit the property owner and surrounding community, and approval is in the public interest.
Thank you. We do have a motion and a second. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Busewader,
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Holston,
Yes.
Mr. Outling,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells.
Yes.
And that passes 9-0. Thank you. We now move on to item number G7, which is a public hearing to receive public comments on the 2021 Justice Assistance Grant.
Move the item.
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Hightower. I believe that was seconded by Mrs. Hoffman.
Yes.
Um,
I think it was
that was
Mrs.
Mr.
Busewader moved it, I think, didn't she?
Yes. Mary
Okay.
Kay.
Moved by Mrs. Busewader, seconded by Mrs. Hoffman. Mrs. Hightower, did you say you had a question?
No.
Okay. I am a yes.
This is the, well, I do have one quick question to you. Is this part of the second grant we were talking about some time ago? When we brought this up the last meeting? Is this
Yes.
the same grant?
Yes.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's just to receive the funds.
Oh, to get the money, fine.
I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Abusawader,
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower, Mrs. Hoffman,
Yes, I didn't know if you could. Hear.
Yes.
Mr. Holston,
Yes.
Mr. Outling,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells.
Yes.
And that passes 9-0. Now we move on to the general business portion of our agenda. Item number H1 is a resolution calling for a bond referendum. And I believe that city staff has resolved the issue of the question about the date in April in which this may occur. Mr. City Manager, can you address that quickly?
We did. We adjusted the item in the scenario in which the date could potentially change based on other election activity. So you'll see that it has basically two dates there now.
Thank you. Do we have a motion?
Move the item. Second.
Moved by Dr. Wells, seconded by Ms. Abusawader. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Abusawader,
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Holston,
Yes.
Mr. Outling,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells.
Yes.
And that passes 9-0. Item number H2 is a resolution authorizing field operations to prepare and submit a grant application to the NC Department of Environmental Quality, NCDEQ, Division of Air Quality, DAQ, for their mobile source diesel emissions reduction, DERA, matching grant fund program.
Move the item.
Second.
And that is moved by Mr. Holston, and that was seconded by
Ms. Hoffman, the councilwoman.
Mrs. Hoffman. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Abusawader,
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Holston,
Yes.
Mr. Outling,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells.
Yes.
And that passes 9-0. Thank you. Item number H3 is a resolution authorizing municipal agreement in the amount of $3,710,000 with North Carolina Department of Transportation for Eastgate City Boulevard Project HL-0046, and item H4, ordinance in the amount of $3,710,000, establishing the budget for a municipal agreement with NC Department of Transportation for Eastgate City Boulevard Project HL-0046.
Move the item.
Second.
And that was moved by Mrs. Johnson,
Hoffman.
Hoffman.
Councilwoman.
Mrs. Hoffman, and seconded by Mr. Holston. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Abusawader,
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower,
Yes, but I would have liked to have had a little explanation from staff pertaining to this. Y'all kind of rolled pretty quickly. Just we wouldn't roll stuff that fast. But I would have liked to have a little explanation. I read the item. Authorizing NCDOT to do this work. So this is not a local project. I guess it's what I was trying to understand.
Madam Mayor, may I address?
yes.
I know y'all in the middle of voting, so I'm sorry.
It is actually authorizing an agreement for NCDOT to reimburse us for the work. So they're going to reimburse us for 80% of the work.
How much?
So this is not the actual project itself. This is an agreement that once we start the project and we incur expenses, that NCDOT will reimburse us a portion up to 80% of the project.
Of 80%. So we when we put the contract out, we will control
Right.
the contract.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That's what I wanted to be sure of and make sure, so that we have a little bit more oversight on it. Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Hoffman? Well, Mrs. Hightower, is that a yes?
Oh, yes. Mhm.
Mrs. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Holston?
Yes.
Mr. Outling?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm?
Yes.
And Dr. Wells?
Yes.
And that passes 9-0. Now I need a motion for H4.
Move the item.
Move the item.
Second.
Was that moved by Ms. Abuzawader?
No, it was
Mr.
Holston. Mr. Holston.
Councilman Holston and Councilwoman Wells second.
Thank you, Mr. Holston and Dr. Wells. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Abuzawader?
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Holston?
Yes.
Mr. Outling?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm?
Yes.
And Dr. Wells?
Yes.
That passes 9-0. Item number H5 is a resolution approving bid in the amount of $13,747,642.63 and authorizing execution of contract 2011-067 with Sharp Brothers, Inc., a division of Vasilio and Grogan, for the Alamance Church Road Widening Improvements Project.
Move the
Move
item.
that, and I'd like to move this
Second.
item, because
All right.
I've been really working on this Alamance Church Road project. And to Mr. Tompkins out there, if you're listening, finally, since 1998, this project has been out there. And it's finally in 2021 being done, just being done. So we should not take this long to get projects done in this community. But finally, we are here. There's some things about it I'm not sure I like, but at least we're moving forward. So move the item.
Second.
So that's moved by Mrs. Hightower, seconded by Mrs. Johnson. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Abuzawader?
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Holston?
Yes.
Mr. Outling?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm?
Yes.
And Dr. Wells?
Yes.
That passes 9-0. Item number H6 is an ordinance amending Chapter 29 of the Code of Ordinances regarding water and sewer rates outside the city.
Move
Do I
the
have a
item.
motion?
Second.
I believe that was moved by Mrs. Hoffman, seconded by Ms. Abuzawader.
Ms. Abuzawader moved.
Tammy Thumb, second.
Thank you. Moved by Ms. Abuzawader, seconded by Mrs. Thurm. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Abuzawader?
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Holston?
Yes.
Mr. Outling?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm?
Yes.
And Dr. Wells?
Yes.
And that passes 9-0. Item number H7 is a resolution approving bid in the amount of $5,057,066 and authorizing execution of contract 2018-043A with Brees Enterprises for the North Elm Street Waterline Replacement Project, and item H8 ordinance in the amount of $7,057,066 for the Elm Street Waterline Project.
Second.
So moved by Dr. Wells, seconded by Ms. Abuzawader. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Abuzawader?
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Holston?
Yes.
Mr. Outling?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm?
Yes.
And Dr. Wells?
Yes.
And that passes 9-0. I need a motion on H8.
Move the item.
Moved by
Second.
Mrs. Thurm, seconded by Ms. Abuzawader. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Abuzawader?
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Holston,
Yes.
Mr. Outling,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells.
Yes.
And that passes 9-0. Item number H9 is a resolution approving a contract in the amount of $1,390,121 with McAdams Company, Inc. to provide professional services for the South Buffalo Stormwater Master Plan.
Move the item.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Abuzawader, and was that seconded by Mrs. Johnson?
Correct.
I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Abuzawader,
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Holston,
Yes.
Mr. Outling,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells.
Yes.
And that passes 9-0. Item number H10 is a resolution approving a contract in the amount of $1,570,490 with Santec Consulting Services to provide professional services for the North Buffalo Stormwater Master Plan.
Move the item.
Moved by Mrs. Thurm. Was that seconded by Mrs. Hoffman? Mike isn't on.
Who's the waiter?
Mary Kay.
Wait a second.
Yes.
Thank you. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Abuzawader,
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Holston,
Yes.
Mr. Outling,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells.
Yes.
And that passes 9-0. Item number H11 is a resolution approving a contract in the amount of $1,549,450 with Kimley Horn and Associates to provide professional services for Horsepen Creek Stormwater Master Plan.
Move the item.
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Thurm, and that was seconded by, was that
Mary
Mrs.
Kay.
Hoffman? Mary Kay. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Abuzawader,
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Holston,
Yes.
Mr. Outling,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells.
Yes.
That passes 9-0. Item number H12 is a resolution approving Water Resources Department to utilize a design-build alternative delivery method for the design and construction of the Liberty Elevated Water Tank.
Move the item.
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Thurm, seconded by Mr. Holston. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Abuzawader,
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Holston,
Yes.
Mr. Outling,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells.
Yes.
That passes 9-0. Item number H13 and H14. H13 is a resolution approving a contract 2016-002A, change order number 2 in the amount of $2,500,000 with Adams Robinson Enterprises, Inc. for extended construction services for TZ Osborne Water Reclamation Facility, BNR upgrade, package 4 construction. And item number 14, an ordinance in the amount of $3,093,429 for TZ Osborne Water Reclamation Facility Package 4 project.
Move the item.
Second.
Moved by Dr. Wells, seconded by Mrs. Johnson. I am a yes.
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson, thank you. Mrs. Abuzawader,
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Holston,
Yes.
Mr. Outling,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells.
Yes.
And that passes 9-0. I need a motion for H14.
Move the item.
Second.
Moved by Dr. Wells, seconded by Mr. Holston. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Abusawader,
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Holston,
Yes.
Mr. Outling,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells.
Yes.
That passes 9-0. Item number H15 is an ordinance in the amount of $4,170,321 for the Alamance Church Road Improvement Project.
Move that. Move the item.
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Hightower, seconded by Mr. Holston. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Abusawader,
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Holston,
Yes.
Mr. Outling,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm,
Yes.
and Dr. Wells.
Yes.
That passes 9-0. Item H16 is an ordinance to amend chapter 16-71A, penalties for unlawful parking of oversized vehicles. Mrs. Hightower?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This ordinance came about because of some concern from the community that we've heard repeatedly. I think you and I have repeatedly heard. So we've asked for a revision. I think legal has been working on this. I don't know if Mr. Dickens is here and he wants to speak to it. Mr. Watt, do you want to speak to it just briefly?
Briefly, yeah, it just addresses penalties associated with these large trucks being parked on the street.
Basically on residential streets, it's for oversized vehicles, particularly tractor trailers, large commercial vehicles that people complain about getting out of their driveways, being able to see around them. And so what we did was, in this instance, we raised the penalty, but we also gave them an opportunity. The first ticket is a warning ticket, so not just going out immediately ticking people, but giving them a ticket, giving them some information, educating them that tractor trailers and oversized are not allowed on residential streets. We've had that ordinance, but it really didn't have a lot of strength to it. And with the third occurrence, they will be towed. And so we hope we don't get to that point. We hope we can do that. It will also be coupled with signage. This allows us to also put signage out. So basically they'll be warned. I've gotten calls from little old ladies who are concerned about even driving in their neighborhood, trying to get around it. And I talked to a company, I will say on Saturday about it. And he told me, he said, we tell our drivers, don't do it. Do not go into neighborhoods. He said, and they better not. He said, if you see one of ours, call me. And I said, yes, sir, thank you. So I think it's just certainly a way to strengthen what we currently have on the book. Will also help our parking enforcement and other code enforcement to be able to have this tool to utilize, to give them a little bit more power to deal with some of the problems we're running into, and just to make it safer overall for the community. So, thank you.
Madam Mayor, I have a
Thank you.
question.
Yes.
Yes, for the city manager, can you give us just a brief highlight on how this is going to get enforced and who's going to enforce it? Because I don't think our parking enforcement folks go outside of downtown. So how is this going to be enforced?
I'm actually going to call on Assistant City Manager Trey Davis. He's been working with all of our teams to have a coordinated effort on this. Trey?
Thank you. Good question. So all of the components, Councilwoman Hightower mentioned, the police department, our code enforcement, as well as our parking enforcement have all received complaints. And so, after receiving them, they've come together, and the actual plan would be code enforcement doesn't necessarily go out to address these type of violations that normally falls on our police department. And you are correct. Normally the footprint for our parking enforcement is in the general downtown area. However, if we need them, if there are issues like this, they can go out and address those. So the plan is during our weekday and business hours that our parking enforcement are on duty, then they will address some of these concerns as they come up and follow the process. Our police department, obviously after hours, will address some as well. If it comes to the place that code enforcement does need to get involved, then they're working hand in hand with them. So this is a sort of a new thing that the three different departments are coming together to address an issue that we definitely have heard from our community.
Thank you.
So if I may, and thank you, Mr. Davis, for that explanation, if I may, Madam Mayor, to Ms. Thurm's question, parking enforcement does go beyond downtown. They have gone pretty much everywhere that I've had a parking concern in areas that we've had concerns even on a Saturday. So they do. While downtown is, of course, has parking issues, there are more parking concerns in the outer community than they are downtown. And so some of it is, that these issues are occurring, and then after 5, there's no way to address them. And so we need to have further conversation. But parking enforcement, in talking to them, is very willing, and all 3 departments are working together. And as well as we are combining, I think, our tow companies now, because all 3 departments got 3 different tow companies and 3 different contracts. And we just need to be more integrated in our model and consistent with this. And I think this will do it. And then GDOT is handling some of the education piece. I will say that as well. We saw what Hannah sent to us today, that they're going to help with the education in the community as well. And I think our tickets will also speak to the process as well, to make sure people are very well informed about this. It's not something we're going to throw at people, but we want to educate, inform, and give opportunity. But the warning ticket will do that before they actually are incurring a fine. That's more than $35, because they just been paying $35 and continuing to park there. So we did raise the fee to $75, and we feel that that will help to get some compliance in that regard.
Thank you, Mrs. Hightower. I assume you want to move that item.
Yes, please. Thank you.
And do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Holston. I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Abuzawader?
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Holston?
Yes.
Mr. Outling?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm?
Yes.
And Dr. Wells?
Yes.
And that passes 9-0. This really is an issue in some residential neighborhoods, trying to get by with these tractor trailers parked. Sometimes it's just the tractor, sometimes they have trailers with them. We have noticed that as staff has gone out to enforce this, that they have been moving to the highway ramps. And I don't know that we have control over any of the highway ramps. I would like to see if staff can find a way to address that. Maybe we can get permission from Ncdeq to continue our parking enforcement down the ramps, because that becomes a very dangerous situation when you've got people coming down ramps or up ramps, whatever way it was, when you have a tractor trailer parked on the side of the road. So if we could get an answer back on that, I'd appreciate it.
We're happy to look into it, that particularly from an obstruction standpoint. We'll have some conversation and get some information back to council.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item number H17 is an ordinance amending the Equipment Services Fund and General Fund fiscal year 2021-2022 budgets in the amount of $1,160,300 for the purchase of police vehicles.
I have
And
a
this
question.
was yes, Mrs. Johnson?
I see the police chief is really directed to him. Is this, we had talked about parking, having this and parking police cars in various areas of the city, letting the police take them home. Does your police staff live in every section, every district of the city? You have police officers that live in District 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
I would say that we do. I don't have the specific numbers about who lives where at this point.
That's important for me to know.
And I've asked that question multiple times, so it's very important. I just think it makes a difference.
I like the idea. I think when people see police cars, it's definitely a deterrence. I see one, I slow way down. But at any rate, I would really like to know how many of your officers who would be qualified to receive a vehicle live in each of the districts.
Okay, we would have to get that information for you. We have some rough numbers about how many live in the city limits, but I do not have it broken down by district. But I'll talk a little bit about, as we present this, I'll talk a little bit about the deployment strategy and how we would deploy these vehicles if they were approved. Thank you, Mayor and City Council. And I will do this presentation along with Marlene Drugga, who will talk more about the financial piece of it. But I just want to start out, and we've covered many of these things before, but just the benefits of a police vehicle program. First of all, enhanced visibility of the police department spread throughout the community. That, of course, speaks to officers that are living in the communities, parking cars there, but also using those vehicles going to and from work. We currently do allow officers to drop off children, pick up children from school on the way to and from work, where you would hopefully see some patrol vehicles going through school parking lots, which I think is a good thing for enhanced visibility and security. But also the driving in and going home. And I'll talk about that as well, about how that will help us reduce wear and tear on vehicles, resulting in longer service life of vehicles. That certainly will impact the financial piece, of course, as an upfront investment. But currently, patrol cars typically last about 3.5 to 4 years. What we have found, where we've got cars that are issued to police officers one for one, we typically drive those cars for about 8 years. So over a period of time, that will actually save some money on the back end, because those cars will certainly last longer. And then also a big piece for us, which would help out, is reduce loss of work time during each patrol shift, as officers will no longer have to load and unload equipment from personal vehicle into a patrol vehicle at the beginning and end of the shift. So right now, the average officer is spending about 80 hours per year actually loading and unloading equipment. So just to give you, to narrow it down into a day, an officer comes to work, they come in, they first have to find their vehicle, they have to locate it, then they have to unload their personal equipment, whether police equipment, from the personal car to the police car, and then have to do that at the end of the shift. So really on the low end, you're talking about approximately 30 to 45 minutes per day per officer that's spent just transferring equipment from one car to the other. And then also, we talk about the competitive edge that we need when it comes to recruitment of officers. We certainly want to retain the good officers that we have, but we also want to attract new qualified candidates that will come to the police department. And that really lends into the next bullet point. When we talk about competitive edge, many of the agencies around us, particularly that border us, Guilford County, High Point, Winston-Salem, the various county sheriff's offices, to include Burlington PD, they all have a take-home car program, essentially a one-for-one program where the car is actually issued to the officer. So we are certainly trying to get to that point eventually, so that we can be competitive in that regard. So to talk about the deployment strategy for patrol divisions, and this is specifically about patrol, just to be clear about that. First, we would deploy, if this were approved, we would deploy cars to police training officers, also known as PTOs or training coaches, and supervisors who reside within the city limits. That would be first. Next, phase 2 would be police officer 3s and partial police officer 2s based on seniority who reside within the city limits.
Phase 3 would be the remaining police officer 2s as well as police officer 1s who reside within the city limits. And then Phase 4 would be PTOs, supervisors, as well as police officer 3s who reside outside the city, but within city policy that allows a city employee to take a vehicle to their home. And then Phase 5 would be police officer 2s and police officer 1s who reside outside the city. So as you see, regardless of rank, if you live in the city, you're essentially going to get your take-home car first as they're deployed. So that is something that we're adamant about. We feel like that's the best way to administer the program, and I will be glad to take any questions just on this part. If not, then I'll turn it over to Marlene.
So,
James, I'm sorry.
oh,
Karen?
go ahead, Hugh. No, you can go
Chief
ahead.
James, a real quick question for you. Looking at this deployment strategy, say hypothetically that a police officer who is in phase 1, 2, or 3, living inside the city limits, then moves outside the city limits. What would the impact be to that vehicle then? Would they retain the vehicle, or would they give up the vehicle because they're no longer in the city limits?
So if that happens at a point where we have not fully deployed vehicles to every eligible officer, then it may be a point where you essentially take that vehicle back and reissue it to someone who lives inside the city. And anytime an employee changes their address, they have to notify us of an address change. So we'll be aware of that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower?
Thank you. So Chief, when you made a comment earlier about it being an incentive, I guess, so a new hire police officer would get one of these cars after they're trained and fully? Because you said that's an incentive
Well,
for hiring. So a person that's just coming on the force would get a car if they live in the city limits.
eventually, assuming the car was available. And I think that as we talk about the phase-in plan, certainly it will take us years to get there to where an officer that just gets out of field training actually gets a car. But under this plan, what I would hope is that if we start to order cars now, that we'll maybe by this time next year, we'll start to see the first phase of officers be issued their cars. But what I would say is realistically, brand new officers that just finished field training, that live in the city limits, probably won't get their cars for at least 2 to 3 years out, depending on how fast we can get the cars and get those cars set up.
So how many cars are you actually talking about? Are we talking 20, 10, 20? What?
So this plan here calls for about 100 cars over a 5-year period. And that will get us closer to our goal, but that still will not fully get us to a 1-for-1. And I think the subsequent slides will get more into exactly how many cars we would order over that period of time and what the financial impact would be.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions for the chief?
I'd just like to say, I want to support this, but I want to know the first question I asked, because I would hate to see a multiplicity of police cars in district, let's just say 4 and 5, and very, very few in 1 and 2. I'd like to see some distribution that looks as equitable as it can look. I don't know if I can say, could we postpone this until we get that information? I am most likely, if I have it and I see that it meets that criteria for me, I will support it, but I need to know.
Could I just offer that tonight we'll only vote on phase 1, which is really 20 cars?
Say what?
We're only voting on phase 1 tonight, which would be 20 cars.
It doesn't matter to me if
Doesn't
we're voting
matter.
on 5 or what it is. I just want to see some kind of equitable distribution across the city in all of the districts.
And Madam Mayor Pro Tem, I would agree with you, and I would be
I want to
seconding.
support this.
I would
but-
second that motion to postpone because but I've asked that question, where are those cars going? And that's important, I think, as we talk about areas that have had issues and how we're going to present cars being in the community and what they can prevent. I think it's critical. I don't want to see all the cars go to West Greensboro. And then everybody says, we're protected over here. And then you still say, I got those issues over there on that other side, and we don't have anything to kind of help us in that regard. And that's my concern. I get it, Chief, that you need help. I do. I understand that, even though I think we're putting a lot of money in the police department. And that's part of the reason the workers stood on the step the other week and came before us and spoke, because they're starting to see an imbalance of investment in one area and not the other. And I want to be fair to everybody. I want to treat us all. We all work hard and we all deserve it. And you do a good job, and I know that. But I just think that if we could find out where they're going to be moving to, taking these cars, and then what is it that we can do to incentivize some of our officers to live in certain areas where maybe they haven't considered or they aren't living. I mean, I think the mayor and I spoke some time ago about having an extra down payment assistance program even.
You
for
may
our
have to do a
workforce.
combination of things in order to do that,
Yeah.
which is good. But I mean, are we in an absolute hurry to do this?
May I ask a question, Madam Chief? Could I ask a
Yes.
question? Chief, could you say to us tonight with some level of certainty that you could deploy 20 cars equitably among the 5 different districts at this point without having the exact numbers?
Yes,
Of number of police officers living in each district. I should think that you might be able to do that, but that's up to you to tell us and whether that's satisfactory.
Well, when you look at a deployment strategy, and that's why when we came up with this, we looked at city limits. I would say it's really hard for me as a chief to essentially legislate where people live in the city. It's your biggest decision. It's it's where your kids go to school. It's a lot of things that are factored in. It's where you can get the most house for your money. And so, we could get numbers. We have some numbers. I don't have them available now of how many officers live in the city, but having it broken down by district, I don't have that. I can certainly get that, and I could report back through the city manager's office. But from a deployment strategy, I think when we look at city limits and based on either seniority or supervisory role, I feel like that's the most equitable way to actually distribute the cars initially until we get to a true one-for-one system.
And Chief, a quick question for you. I think it was asked earlier by someone, the time critical nature of this decision. And I'll say that in general, I am in favor of this policy. But listening to Mayor Pro Tem Johnson and her reservations about it, and also Councilwoman Hightower, I guess the thought is that if there's not a time critical nature, could we get that information? Now, also understanding your point that you don't legislate where your officers live. We're in the city, so they may all be in District 1, or they may all be in District 5 or 3 or whatever else. And those first 20 cars may end up in one of those 3. And what if that happens? Is it a bad program? No. I still think it's a good program. It's just a matter of, 1, is it time critical right now to make the decision? And 2, once that comes in, then we just have another decision to make. It may be a tough decision based upon where people are living and where the cars are deployed and how many cars we have. But is it time critical right now?
I would say from a right now standpoint, I would say the answer is yes. And the reason why I say that is because the agencies that I listed that are around us, they've had this program for many years. And we actually have a plan here that would just phase it in over a period of about 5 years. We've had a lot of conversations about this, and what I've said is that if we had started down the path that we're trying to start now about 10 years ago, we would probably be there, and it would have been a lot cheaper. So as we delay it, if we're going to move in that direction, it's just going to become more expensive. And right now, cars are actually very difficult to get. It's taken us about 6 to 8 months to actually get cars if we ordered one today.
Right. And that kind of takes me back to the last conversation we had regarding, you doing what you need to do to make things happen, because it is a 911, it is a Hunger Games. I am more apt to be supportive tonight of the action to go ahead and move forward, because it is, this past weekend we had some more instances of things going on, and I know that staffing isn't going to solve it all. I know that these cars being deployed is not going to solve it all, but how do you eat an elephant? That's one bite at a time, and you're taking little bites, and the faster we take those bites, the faster we have a chance to have an impact. Understanding and being respectful of Mayor Pro Tem
No, I
Johnson
understand
and
what you're
Councilwoman
saying.
Hightower.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, I understand. We have Ms. Abuzawader, Mrs. Thurm, and Dr. Wells after
Yeah.
Mr. Holston is through.
yes, thank you.
I'm finished.
Were you through, Mr. Holston? I'm sorry. I do think it is critical that we vote on this evening, and I'll tell you my reasons why. After I've looked at it, I've asked questions prior to this meeting, trying to figure out what do we do, but ladies and gentlemen, we are losing officers every day to these surrounding communities that have cars. Surrounding communities are also doing retention bonuses to keep their officers. Every time we go up and have a class, next time we go down because we lose 5, 6, 7, 8 more officers, and I'm not just talking about retirements. So I do think this is critical this evening, and I have every bit of confidence in this chief and this staff that they will do everything in their power to make sure that every quadrant in the police, they do the quadrants and not the 5 council districts, but I can assure you that I would certainly state that I have complete confidence that Chief James, his staff, and our city staff will make sure that it is equitable across the city. But I have a fear if we don't start this now, and he's already told us it's going to take months, it's going to take years to get up to full fleet. But when you have an officer who spends like 45 minutes to an hour transferring all the equipment, all the things that he needs in order to do his job, from his personal car to his city car, you've lost 45 minutes of police time. That's a lot of time. And then they have to transfer it back. That's a lot of time that they could have been out on the street helping either prevent crime or be when someone in the city needs them. So I really, truly do not believe that we should delay on this. And I have every bit of confidence that I can muster that it will be done in an equitable way. And I thank you. And I do want to say that, Mayor Vaughn brought this up earlier this year to do this. And at that time, we kind of said no because we were worried about budget. And I was one of those worried about budget. But if the staff has found a way to start moving forward with this, I'm going to support this wholeheartedly because we can't lose any more of our good officers. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mrs. Thurm, then Dr. Wells, then Mrs. Hoffman.
Yes, the point I wanted to make, and I appreciate your concerns, Councilwoman Hightower, Councilwoman Johnson, or Mayor Pro Tem Johnson, sorry. But this is being asked for as a recruiting and retention tool. The crime deterrence of having these cars in neighborhoods is a secondary benefit of it. And for that reason, I think we need to focus on right now, getting the ball rolling. I think by authorizing the 20 vehicles now, if the chief finds that there is another way to do it, that he can equitably spread them slightly a different way within the allocation of cars or something of that nature, that's fine. I don't think the chief, and correct me if I'm wrong, chief, that we are locking in. While I support your deployment strategy, we're not voting on the deployment strategy. We're voting on buying the cars. And I think if we find that there's a major problem with deployment strategy by district, the chief will figure out how to do that. But I think going ahead and approving the money and the funds now is important. Like Mary Kay said earlier, Councilwoman Buswaiter said earlier, I voted against this initially because of concerns about the budget. We've kind of worked through that, and for that reason, I'll be supporting it this time.
If I may say one thing, it's also about an efficiency, as we talked about that. And, I've talked about staffing before and how we've tried to find various efficiencies and just the transfer of equipment. Another issue that arises is when we have big events, we typically have an issue with finding enough vehicles. So this would actually help on that front as well when we're deploying for things like the Fund Fourth or anything like that. We typically have issues finding vehicles.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Wells?
I've heard the concerns of Mayor Pro Tem and Ms. Hightower, but I think that Councilwoman Hightower, but I think that we're looking at two different issues here. I think the car to acquire the cars is something that is for recruiting to get more people interested. I know we see the other areas that have the other cities that have it, but this would be something that would attract other policemen. I think the other issue is that we're thinking about cars being a deterrent to crime. If you see a car in your neighborhood, maybe that will cause someone not to commit a crime. So it's two different issues, I think, with the cars. I am in favor of us getting the cars, using the strategy that has been outlined. And then I think a separate issue would be, which goes along with our recruiting, that we would recruit some officers, if there are none in District 1, that none in District 2 that live there, that we could incentivize or something and say, if you live in that neighborhood, then you'll get a car. But that's a separate thing. I think right now we have to just go ahead and get these cars and then see how we can work it out to get people to live in those areas or to be where a car will make a difference.
Thank you. Mrs. Hoffman, then Mr. Outling.
Just a couple of things. I actually am totally supportive of this tonight. In fact, I had this conversation originally several months ago with the mayor and said that I thought that we should revisit this issue, which we're discussing tonight. I think the chief he's shared his criteria with us in terms of how he would deploy these. It certainly sounds, it seems like a sound methodology to me. I think we certainly always want to try to be equitable in the things that we do as well. And I'm certain that he will take a look at that over time. But we're making a decision tonight to purchase 20 cars. The deployment strategy is separate from that. And if we need to have a discussion about that later, we can. And I'm certainly attuned to those things. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Outling?
Thank you. It would be, obviously we have information as council members about how much money it's going to cost and where the money is going to come from. I have questions for the chief that are related to that, but it perhaps would be helpful to have staff present the information to inform the questions that I'm going to ask.
I would appreciate that. Marlene's going to go over that piece of it because there's also a care for these vehicles that we need to discuss.
Great. And so I guess if Marlene, you
Yes.
make that presentation, then I'll direct questions to you and the chief.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions for me?
Well, Chief, I have questions about your thoughts and expert opinion about the efficacy of the expenditure, to Ms. Wells's point, both in reducing crime as well as retention. But it's not in a vacuum because money is fungible and you can do other things with money to address both those issues. So if Ms. Draga could present the financial aspects, I may have some questions for you after that.
I would just say from, and I'm not the financial expert, she's about to come here in a second. But what I would say is that this is just a piece of the puzzle. And really the position I'm in as a chief is that there are all these agencies around me that offer something that we don't have. And that's a concern. And sometimes people do leave us because they're going to get a take-home car immediately when they get to their new agency. And we certainly want to eliminate that.
Yeah, and then perhaps I'll defer to Ms. Draga, but the nature of the question or questions where I'd like your thoughts on it is, obviously, there are lots of different ways to address attempts to reduce crime. There are lots of different ways to address retention. So for example, oftentimes in the legal field, you attract more people, you retain more people by having really high salaries. And correspondingly, the benefits are very poor because the idea is that that's the best way to attract people. And you could theoretically do the same thing with cars. I mean, you could give an attorney a take-home car, but ultimately it's about the total compensation. And so my question was, and I think the context of what is the total expenditure, because that makes a difference. I'd be interested to know, in your view, what are reasonable expectations for what the consequence of this expenditure will look like with regard to crime? And then what are your reasonable expectations for how it will actually assist with retention? In other words, what does success look like and what are you thinking that we can achieve by making this expenditure?
Well, somebody asked me what impact I thought it would have on crime. The thing is, quite honestly, it's hard to answer that question because we've never had full deployment of take-home cars in this community. So we certainly could track that once the cars were deployed to see if it in fact had an impact wherever those cars were parked. I think it would be, it'd probably be somewhat difficult to do it, but we could certainly try. When we talk about retention, and think about it in these terms, if an officer leaves today, it will take me a minimum of a year to replace that officer because of the time it takes to recruit that person, to do the background checks, to process that person, and then to train them. So from day one, when they step into the academy, it's almost 11 months before they answer their first call by themselves. And then we take about probably an average of 3 months to vet that person before they even step into the academy. So what I'm hoping is that, again, this is a piece of the puzzle. What I'm hoping is that this will help with recruitment and retention, because every person I can keep, that's another person I don't have to find.
And that makes great sense. You know, and it doesn't mean, obviously, I'm not going to support it, but I think at least for future discussions, because I understand that there are additional things that you think would be helpful for retention, attracting officers and so on, including additional compensation for more skills. At least for those future discussions, what I find would be helpful is kind of more granular, specific what the expectations are going to be. Even if that's using, obviously not Greensboro as a comparator, because we don't have it, even if it's looking at other communities. So for example, in those communities that have take-home cars now, at one point they didn't have take-home cars. And so it'll be interesting to know whether or not in those areas where officers have their take-home cars, whether or not any conclusions can be made, including whether or not it reduced crime. And for me, that's important because based on the comments of others and even myself, it's a big assumption that it will do those things. And so the data to support or not support it just would be helpful. It doesn't mean it's not worthy of support. I mean, you've articulated many good reasons for taking the action, but that additional information would be helpful. including with regard to retention, because I know that like I said, there are a lot of different ways to retain people. I think when you've been asked on occasion, again, you've kind of noted, you think that it would be great if we had additional compensation for people that had additional skills or additional certifications. But I do think for the public's interest, at least since it hasn't been discussed, perhaps Marlene should go over the finances.
Well, and just to go back to one thing I mentioned previously, the time to actually load equipment and set up a car. If you take a squad of 8 officers, which would be essentially a fully staffed squad, if each one of those officers spends 30 minutes loading and unloading equipment at the beginning and end of the shift, that's 4 hours that they're not out actually patrolling their areas. So I think from that perspective, I think that it could certainly help with crime reduction, because we are literally paying people to unload and unload equipment each day. And that would actually put more patrol hours out into the community.
Yeah, to be clear, I understand the logic of it, but for me, when we can look at data to help inform the decisions, like that information would be helpful, at least in terms of my analysis. Again, it doesn't mean that it's not worthy of support, but to kind of Mrs. Johnson's point, like if we can have the data and have the information to have the decision informed by that, that would be terrific, especially where some of these things we're making assumptions as to what it will do. I think they're sound assumptions, and to be quite frank, I'm going to likely make that assumption myself tonight, but where we have the information available, I would prefer not to make the assumption because the money is fungible. I mean, we can give the police department $1.5 million tonight. It can be for take-home cars. It could be for additional certifications. It can be for additional equipment. It could be for bonuses. And so just having that data to me would be helpful to make sure that not only is the expenditure effective, but in terms of prioritization, it's the next thing that's best to be done. So I appreciate your answers.
Thank you.
And could Ms. Joyga just give a brief presentation so at least the public understands?
I think Mrs. Hightower may have had a question for the chief, or do you want to wait till after Mr. Ruga's presentation?
Let me ask him this question before she comes. I still want to hear what the cost is and all of that. And Chief, there's a perception I don't like the police, and that's okay. But I understand my community and I know how to feel about some things. But what I also know is they don't see a police car from time to time. And so maybe having a police car, maybe they'll be able to drive through the community. But you say there are other cities that have take-home cars. What have they said? What have they seen take-home cars do? I'd love to hear from somebody who says, yes, we identified that we have take-home cars, and because of that, and it should do two things, Goldie. It shouldn't just be separate. Yes, the presumption is if there's a car sitting in a neighborhood, that's why the highway patrol on holidays put empty highway patrol cars on the highway, because they know they slow people down. Duh. So, I mean, people assume that if you see a police car, that it's going to kind of be a deterrent. So I don't see it as one separate issue. I see it as two. Don't see it as two. I see it as one whole issue of what we would expect to happen. But what has been what have you seen from other departments that indicate, okay, these people take a car home and they see reduction in crime. So like every city is experiencing high crime right now, but are they not experiencing the highest crime because they're driving home police cars? And it is a concern that they're not going to be in my community. And I ride my community a lot. There might be one or two of your officers that live in District 1. I don't think it's a matter whether they live in the district. It's whether they live on the east side. And I don't know just how many of them would do that. But I would feel better if you could tell me that or give me some semblance of some numbers around that and say, well, if we give it to police training officers, 5 of them live on the east side, 6 of them, or whatever the case may be. I just would feel a little bit better about that. Just because I don't want it to look like we're giving you all the money to do everything under the sun. I want us to see if this is gonna really make a difference.
But the problem in trying to actually talking about other cities is that, and I'll give you an example. I've been with the police department with GPD almost 26 years now. And as long as I've been with GPD, Winston, High Point, and the county have had 1-for-1 cars for their officers. So to ask them, like, what difference has it made? Well, they probably can't tell you because they've had that program for so long. It's become essentially the mean or the average of what's going on in the community. So whatever impact it's had, quite honestly, is probably undetectable at this point. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They've had it so long. I mean, it's been over 25 years that they've had this program. So I don't know that they have anything to compare it to. And then over time, the populations have grown and things like that. And it would really be hard to say, well, take-home cars did this for this community.
Yeah, and Winston's actually crime is actually higher than ours right now, to be honest. They're having, so that's why I'm not sure if saying that would really help me to process what the benefit of a take-home car is. But we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. So let's do the 20 and see how it goes.
Okay.
Well, the question that I wanted to ask was these cities that are around us, if their crime is lower than ours, if we talk about the comparison and how long they've had cars and all that, I guess we can't do, because it's not just like apples to apples and oranges to oranges. What we need to decide tonight is whether we want to move forward and get some police cars. Everybody around us has them. Why can't we go on and get the police cars? We'll find out whether they helped or not after we get them. And I'm thinking they will help. The chief has made his recommendation. The mayor wants us to do it. And when I look around and we try to be competitive and all these little towns have police cars, and then we coming up with, asking all kinds of questions before we get on board, and we 26 years behind. So I think it's time we make this decision, whether we're going to do it or not, because we can talk about it all night.
Madam Mayor, I had one question for Chief James and one brief comment.
Okay.
Chief James, when we put a prospective officer through the academy, what is the average, just a ballpark figure of how much it costs this city to put that prospective officer on the street? How much you think?
It's, I'd say ballpark, it's about 100,000 or a little bit more.
For each officer?
Yes, that includes salary, benefits, and understand that that first 11 months, there's always someone with that officer, who that officer is under their direction, whether it's an instructor in the academy or a training coach. So between equipment, the instruction, and the recruitment, keep in mind the hours we spend to recruit and do backgrounds, we've easily put $100,000 investment in that person.
In each officer. So
Yes.
I want to take it from that angle very quickly, because I know we need to go ahead and vote on this.
Yes, we do.
So we have the $100,000 per officer. We have the time spent where they're loading from a personal car to a police car. We have where we hope be able to recruit officers. We hope we will be able to retain officers. I can't see any way to gauge anything about whether crime is going to increase or not, but I can guarantee you that we will at least have a full police force unless something else comes up and our neighbors start giving all of these incentives that we aren't giving. I think it's time that we just, oh gosh, I don't want to say bite the bullet, but I really think that we need to see about this, and we leave it up to our chief to figure out the equitable part. And I know we need to hear from Marlene, but it's just very important to me that when we talk about money and all of these things, people need to know how much it costs to recruit that officer and put that officer on the street, because that's very, very important that we're losing all that money when these surrounding communities entice them away from Greensboro. And I think that's extremely important for people to know. Thank you.
And Madam Mayor, if I may.
Okay,
Thank you. Chief, earlier this month, we had a conversation and we talked about your staffing numbers, 690. Currently, you're below 600. You're losing about 60 per year in attrition.
Right.
To help allay some of the concerns that you heard tonight, for instance, hypothetically, I'm not sure if Marlene's going to speak to this, but from a retention standpoint, do you think it's going to impact 10%, 20%? If it's, 10, 20%, that's 612 persons per year, cumulatively, 12, 2 years, 24, 36. What do you think you could do with, in a sense, 12 additional officers per year, 24 in 2 years, 36 in the future years? What types of impacts do you think you could have with that type of cumulative effect?
Well, I'll focus on the number 12, because that would essentially be a fully staffed squad to include the supervision of that squad. So over time, I mean, if we're able to retain those people, again, those are people that we don't have to go out and find and recruit. And losing, 5 per month, which that number has been pretty steady for about the past 2 to 3 years. We're having to hire and train at least 60 a year just to keep up, just to keep from losing ground. So really, and I'll give you this in terms too, we can run a capacity class of about 40 recruits at a time. And we can run about 2 classes a year. That's just people with no training that come in. And so even if we were able to do that and successfully graduate and deploy 80 officers a year, we're only going to gain 20 within a calendar year. So we certainly, and this conversation came up before, we're working on this with HR, but we also need to look at how we can recruit officers that want to come from other areas to come here as well, because that's the only way that we're going to close that gap of vacancies within a reasonable amount of time. I hope I answered your question.
You did. It's just a matter of if you have, in a sense, every year 12 additional resources.
Yes.
How would you deploy them? Where would you deploy them? What could they do to help impact the things that are going on outside of the fact that you have people that you're pulling in or that you're holding on to? We all know in business that the hardest thing is to keep the employees you have before you start going out. And it seems to me that this is a method of keeping the employees, the officers that you have, and it gives you the opportunity to deploy them. If 12 people just showed up, walked in the door right here and said, deploy us, where would you put them? And that's in effect what this program could do if it's up to the 20%
They would
savings.
Yeah, and I can tell you, I mean to cut you off, sorry. I can tell you they would all go to our patrol divisions, and particularly in the areas where we've got the most crime. That's where they would go. We certainly, and right now, just to fill that gap, again, we've been running overtime, which was authorized through the city manager's office about a year ago to try to fill some of those gaps. I worry about that too, because I think officers need to take a day off sometimes, but we've got officers coming in working overtime, and we're also deploying occasionally specialized units to include detectives that are putting on uniforms, daily from different divisions that are actually also going out to supplement call answer. That's a concern as well, because some of those detectives follow up on very serious cases. And of course, when they're out answering calls, there's not another detective that's actually working their cases for them.
Right. So you have extra resources just from having the 12 who didn't leave, and then you're actually relieving that burden of overtime. And overtime is a burden. If it's not a short-term thing, then it's a burden and it's stressful. So you're also having a chance to relieve the stress.
Absolutely. And I think that's important because, there's all kinds of studies out there about, no matter what you do, you need a day off. And we certainly don't want anybody we don't want to rely on that. That's a Band-Aid. It's certainly not a cure for our staffing issues.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. If we could move on and have Marlene give her presentation.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of City Council. In order to implement Chief James's plan, it really involves also the work of the Equipment Services Division. And this is a group of about 50 employees who actually are part of finance. And they're located at the Patton Avenue facility. And so Equipment Services actually centrally purchases, maintains, and then they lease back the vehicles to the various departments. So they do about approximately 2/3 of all the city fleet. And that is about 2,000 or more than 2,000 vehicles that they service, including the heavy duty refuse trucks, dump trucks, and hauling trucks, as well as all the light duty and all the police vehicles. So we currently have about 500 police vehicles, or more than 500, and of those 190 patrol cars. And so it costs about $13,000 just for the upfit of a vehicle to turn it into a police patrol, including the light bars, the partitions, but primarily it's mainly the electronics that go into it and the parts and labor for that. So it takes one technician approximately 2 weeks just to upfit one vehicle and put it into service. So here's our cost estimate, and we estimate to phase in 20 vehicles over a 5-year period. And this is now using an increased life of 8 years. And what we're being asked to vote on tonight is the year one, the 1,160,000 purchase of the vehicles, and then the setup, which is including all the upfit that I just mentioned. So it goes from 160 all the way out for 5 years. And at that point, there would be 100 vehicles in service, and the total estimated cost would be 2.7 million. But just tonight is the 20 vehicles in this budget. And then in each subsequent year, it would be part of the annual budget process. So you would have an opportunity to vote for potentially 20 more or more in each budget. But this just shows kind of our estimate of what we think it would be based on adding 1 to 2 technicians to be able to accommodate this program. So just our final comment, the existing garage is really at or over capacity right now for our current service levels. And so adding on this program really just brings in the needs into sharper focus. So we had initially talked about this at some of our bond referendum conversations, where we introduced the possibility of using 2/3 bonds for the actual improvements at the garage facility. So the oldest part is over 60 years old. So 1963, and that's where all the light duty vehicles are maintained. And then in 2007, there was an addition put on for more of the heavy duty. And so, but then again, that's 14 years old as well. So if we were going to potentially use 2/3, and that would be about $16 million in this next capacity, in the spring or summer, we would need to be coming back to you to introduce that and request funding for that particular purpose. And so we would propose to do it in 2 phases. So the first phase would be for the light duty. And if this program for police were going to continue, then that's where we would try to plan that so that we could accommodate adding on more police vehicles as we went forward. So phase 1 would be just the light duty, and then phase 2 would be about 18 to 24 months out from that. And at that point, there would be anticipated another capacity of another maybe 16 million in 2/3 bonds as well. So if we broke it into 2. So there's a piece of city land right across the street from this facility on Patton that we're looking at to possibly make a new facility, or actually construct a new facility in these 2 phases that we're talking about. So they could ideally still be in the old building for part of it. And then as they're phasing in, they could start to phase in the new if we did it in that manner. So that's been all our discussions on how to approach the project if we were going to actually need more facility for it. And we're actually starting to look at a design contract just to get our ideas and on numbers of total costs. So, because we eventually do need the facility at some point. So those are mainly all of the prepared slides. If I can answer any other particular questions, if we need the chief back.
I don't have any questions, but I'd like to move the item.
I have questions on this particular point. What are, bonds are borrowing money, right? So it's just taking on debt, and we have to pay on the debt, just like people, when they have credit cards, have to pay on their credit card debt. What are the options aside from taking on more debt that would allow us to accomplish this goal this evening, but not take on more debt? Because it gives me a little bit of a pause to say or suggest that we're going to take on more debt when we have over $50 million of money that's not been allocated. And certainly in my own household, I wouldn't go on and just take on debt if I knew I had tons of money in the bank account and I didn't necessarily need to take on the debt.
So you're meaning just for the facility portion of it, or
Sure.
are you?
Well, I imagine the facility is going to do more than just things in connection with this item. And so to the extent we're not discussing those other things that are going to happen at the facility and whether or not those other things are worthwhile as compared to the city's other tremendous needs, I'd be interested to know what other options are there for proceeding with this item tonight and providing the additional police cars. If there are any other options other than taking on, I guess, $32 million in debt to accomplish it.
Marlene, I'm going to jump in at this point.
Okay,
Thank you very
sure.
much. And don't go too far.
Okay, I'll be here.
Councilmember Atling, regarding options at this point, given the size of the project we're talking about, we really don't have any immediate or obvious options. It's one of those projects that we've been gradually trying to get in front of council and keep in front of council now for quite some time. The 2/3 bonds use is somewhat unique to Greensboro. We haven't used it a lot. We have used it from time to time, and we recognize we're asking you to exercise that authority. I would just note in this case, when you do use 2/3 bonds, you are effectively reusing debt that you are paying off. So you're actually not increasing our overall debt ceiling. You're using the ability of previous paid off debt to be reissued. And traditionally, it is used for projects that can be difficult to structure for a community vote, like a garage, which is oftentimes, while we can completely document its need, very often does not fare well on a public referendum. So from our perspective, again, as Marlene said, the need has been out there. It's been growing as the fleet has been growing. This particular focus on the police take-home car really just kind of brings into focus that this is an infrastructure need that we need to address.
Yeah, and that's helpful. I would say it's still debt. I mean, we burn off an ability to borrow and we then come back and borrow more, but it's still borrowing money. And if we borrow money today, it means that we can't borrow money in the future for other projects. And as a result, I think everything where we're borrowing money, including through bonds, whether it's genuine issuance or 2/3 bonds, we should really look at it carefully. Is it in fact the case that there are literally no other options other than borrowing this money to execute on this project? Because I assume that, from what I understand, we're talking about to have this facility is $32 million. For example, I know we've received over $32 million from the federal government. And if, for example, staff's thought was that even aside from this item tonight, that this facility is really, really important, it's a high priority, I would expect that staff would say, council, with your American Rescue Plan's money, priority number one is build this facility. And if that's what staff thinks is a high priority, it'd be helpful to know that. But that's why I'm pressing so much on what are the other options other than borrowing money, which burdens us and means we can't borrow money in the future for other things that we'll presumably discuss and may be of a higher value.
I would say, again, given the particulars of this project,
the additional long life that we would expect to get out of the project, which also tends to lend to borrowed funds because you'd like future generations to have to pay for, future generations to have to pay for a facility that we hope to be in for another 50 or 60 years. Borrowing money, in fact, is actually an appropriate and a prudent process. With regards to American Rescue Plan, I will acknowledge that we had not considered whether council would be willing to allocate literally half of our funds for this particular project. If we get direction to that, we'll certainly consider that.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to belabor the point, but I think it would be helpful to benefit from staff's expert advice, expert thoughts, as well as their thoughts on prioritization. And if, for example, staff in its professional judgment believes that this facility is at the top of the list for city needs, it'd be helpful to hear that even outside the context of this item. Because to me, this kind of puts, I'll speak for myself in an analytical bind is a $32 million facility is kind of being attributed and being latched onto something that's for a much lesser amount and for something that we've actually had a discussion tonight. But the other things in connection with that facility don't have a discussion. And by definition, the city's resources are limited. If we spend 32 million on a facility, that means that we're not spending that money elsewhere where it may be something really important. And council as elected legislative body might decide that that's something else is really important. And so it's really a matter of having the benefit of expert staff and the benefit of having a full, robust discussion about when significant expenditures are made. But if we don't have that information and staff doesn't have a recommendation, obviously we vote without having perfect information frequently, but that information would be helpful to have.
I appreciate that point. Let me just offer this to assist. Yeah, this facility would have to be built regardless because of the capacity challenges we have outside of this item. And you're absolutely correct about that. And we are due for another conversation about this, and we're getting some design work done so that we can give a better accounting of what that would look like. To the point, we've grown our fleet in general, and we haven't grown our mechanics. And we've got to start talking about those things in addition to some of the other capacity challenges we have. But for the item tonight, specific to the cars, that is a fund balance accounting. And we will come back to you with regard to the garage and how we would fund and the details around that.
Great, excellent. Thank you much. That's very helpful.
And
just
also
make a
to be clear,
comment.
there's nothing on your agenda tonight regarding the garage. You're not voting
Right.
on a project or design or anything like that. We just want to continue to keep that project in front of council for much of the reasons you've stated tonight, because it is a top priority. We want it to be something that you're aware of as we go into a multi-year expansion of our rolling stock.
That's helpful. And I understand that goes to the point made by the interim manager that there may be options effectively for doing other things. Whatever facilities are needed, that's not a part of what's happening tonight. And we'll hopefully have an opportunity to have a real discussion about the facility, its merits, including for things that are completely unrelated to the item that we're discussing tonight. Thank you.
Just one other comment. I think that there is one of the other things that we should think about here. There's a return on investment to making this investment. There's a return in terms of the life of the automobile, in terms of the retention of the officers, and in terms of the wasted time that they can be deployed at their job. So I think there is clear justification in terms of what the return on investment can be here.
Madam Mayor, I made the motion.
I'd like to make a comment too. And I do think this has been a great discussion. I don't want us to get confused about the garage. The garage is a separate issue. And it is something that has been brought before us on a number of times. I want to thank the chief for his leadership. And I know that this is just part of the overall discussion. At our last meeting, Mr. Holston brought forward that he wants to look at other things too. This is just one step along the process. The chief has stated unequivocally that this is going to help with recruitment, retention, and efficiency. And I can't think of three things more that we are asking him for: recruitment, retention, and efficiency. He mentioned overtime. I know that many of our officers, all of our officers are working overtime, and I am very concerned about overtime fatigue. Good things don't happen when people are fatigued. And we owe it to our police department and to our city to make sure that we can do everything we can do to make us the most attractive city. I think Mrs. Hightower brought up and Mayor Pro Tem Johnson about where people live. You know, we have a very robust down payment assistance program. I think we had identified in our housing study other areas that should be redevelopment areas. I know Glenwood was one where if people moved to Glenwood and 4 other neighborhoods, that they could actually qualify for more down payment assistance. I think we need to make that discussion a priority so we can have city employees living throughout the city and not living outside of the county. So I appreciate everybody for their comments today. And I know this is the 3rd time that I've brought up the issue of the take-home cars. And I hope that it will pass this evening. So I believe we had a motion by Mrs. Abuzawader.
Yes.
And a second by
Seconded by
Councilwoman
Wells.
Dr. Wells.
And a
Dr.
second by Dr. Wells. So I am a yes. Mrs. Johnson?
Chief, I respect you. I'm gonna vote yes. But I want council to know, if we look at this whenever after a year, and we have just not enough in areas that we go back to this drawing board and fix it. And I hope that we'll do that. We have some incentives to do that with, and we fix it. I vote yes.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson, and I commit to you that we will have this follow-up and make sure that it's right. Mrs. Abuzawader?
Yes.
Mrs. Hightower?
Chief, I'm gonna support this because you say you want more cars in our community. But I piggyback on Ms. Johnson. We need to make sure where these cars are going. It's very important. I think in the community that they don't saturate one side versus the other. And if it takes us building up our down payment assistance program even more to make that an incentive as well, not just having cars or having higher pay. If they're gonna get higher pay, that's investing in our community and let's buy homes. And I think that's critically important. It's very important for me in my area. So I'm gonna support it tonight for you to get this done, but just hear the concern as well. But also know that I want to also emphasize, we gotta support other departments to this tune as well. We've got to invest in other departments because when they see us doing this, okay, and we don't do it for other sides, it creates some morale problems. And we want our city to be safe. So I understand your goal as well. So I just hope you hear me out. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mrs. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Holston?
Yes.
Mr. Outling?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurm?
Yes.
And Dr. Wells?
Yes.
And that passes 9-0. Thank you very much. I do want to follow up on the down payment assistance discussion, the mini discussion we just had. I'd like to see if we could get it on a work session and see if there is a possibility that we can assist specifically our city employees and maybe county school teachers with additional down payment assistance. We have the $10,000 down payment assistance for certain economic parameters. I'd like to come back and look at how we can make that program even more successful. I know that we started out with the 100 Homes Initiative. We're now, well over 700 homes. What can we do to encourage our employees to live in the city in which they work? And how can we show them additional appreciation with this down payment assistance help?
Madam Mayor, if the whole council's going to do that, great. But if it becomes a committee, I'd like to serve on that committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. we will certainly ask you to serve on the bond committee as we're talking about these issues. But I'd like to get staff to bring us all up to speed and how we can be more flexible and more targeted in some of these investments. So thank you. Boards and commissions, I believe, is next. If you have any boards, if you would say who you are replacing, Mrs. Johnson?
No.
Mrs. Abusawader?
None.
Mrs. Hightower?
None. Sorry.
Mrs. Hoffman?
None.
Mr. Holston?
No.
Mr. Outling?
None this evening, thank you.
Mrs. Thurm?
None for me.
And Dr. Wells?
None for me.
Thank you. Council comments, Mrs. Hightower?
Okay, thank you. Two things. First off, we have not had our work session for the MWBE that got postponed. It seemed like it's just dropped off into the wind. And I don't know where it is and why it's not brought back up, but I'd like to have that before the end of the year. I'd like to hear from Griffin and Strong as well to get understanding of where we are. We're going to be in another RFP process soon, so we need to understand where we're going to be. And I know Griffin and Strong, who's not a cookie cutter organization, who does a very good job, with MWBE analysis, and they've done it for the Department of Administration, Department NCDOT. So and they're doing it now even for the county as well. So they are a good organization. They've set the bar high on what that study looks like. And I want us to go back and when we start looking at moving forward with an RFP, to make sure we have something to compare to. And I think they're a good company, but I'd like to see if we can circle back with that work session. The second thing, and I'll just repeat what I said earlier, and that was in reference to making, I don't know where we are with a staffing study or a salary study for the remainder of the staff. I think there is some concern around the step increase that was brought to our attention the last council meeting, and certainly I understand that there are some things we need to look at more and investigate and make sure. We want all our employees to feel like they're valuable to this organization. And if we identify that money is the way to feel valuable, then we need to make sure that that's happening across the board. And I do know for a fact that there are departments that don't feel quite the same way as others do, that they're valuable. So I'd like for us to look at, maybe, I don't know how recent we did a salary study, but maybe we need to do another one moving forward to see where we are. COVID has brought about a lot of changes. And I've heard people have even left some jobs to go to work for McDonald's because they're paying 17 and 20 bucks an hour. Who knew you could flip a hamburger for that? That's pretty good. So I would like for us to really look at that.
Plus you get a cheeseburger.
Ma'am, what?
Plus you get a cheeseburger.
Well, put cheese on it. Yes, ma'am.
Just kidding, sir.
I do. So I would like for those two things. I really would like for us to look at those. One of them we may not get to by the end of the year, but I'd like to see where we could get with the work session. I do want to say on November 6th, Woodley had a very good event, which I enjoyed. I think Mr. Holston made sure people got vaccinated. And children even got vaccinated at that event. That was the first time children could do it. And there was a right good amount of children who came. So I was excited out there, even though it was cold, it was still a fun time. Also, we got a new Black-owned business that opened up downtown. A young man by the name of Amir Blackwell, Hype Clinic is called. I don't really know what Hype Clinic is because I'm not that cool, but nevertheless, it's a nice space. And I'm certainly proud of any entrepreneur, but when you see Black businesses and Black entrepreneurs opening up, even during a COVID period, we want them to be very successful. Congratulations to the Up Churches who run the Baby World Daycare for the last 50 years of taking care of children on Phillips Avenue. And that's another Black-owned business that's been around for 50 years. And so certainly congratulations to them. I enjoyed Hayes Taylor Wise Banquet. We've been real busy lately. And that was last Sunday, as well as NCCJ. Virtual banquets are really cool too, because you don't have to get real dressed up for that. So I like that. But it's been a busy month, so happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Don't eat too much turkey. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Johnson?
Yes, you mentioned NCCJ. I attended that in person and it was a beautiful event, and congratulations to the citation recipients. Betty Cohn was one of them. Of course, she has been a dear friend of mine for many years. And also the Tanger Center for the Donors the other night was really lovely. For those of you who weren't there, your representative Kathy Manning can sing. She sang a song. It just shocked me to death, but she sang very well. But I enjoy that. That's about it, Mayor. Happy Thanksgiving. Be safe. Be safe, be kind, and do something for somebody who needs something done for them.
Thank you. Very well said. Dr. Wells?
Well, I virtually attended the Community Housing Solutions annual event, and I was really impressed that they highlighted the Growing Gracefully program. And that's a program they go in and not only fix up the house, but they bring some mental health and physical health and all those things that a person would need so they can go gracefully, aging gracefully in their own home. So they had those people who had been recipients, and they were telling how important the program had been to them. And I was really impressed with that. And I serve as the liaison for the library board. And tomorrow night, that we've had One City, One Book, there by Tommy Orange. Well, on tomorrow night at the Terrace at 7 o'clock at the Coliseum Complex, the Terrace. He will be there. And if you want to hear a flute concert, come at 6:40. And there will be a flutist there rendering music. But this is a tribute to I think we have one of the largest populations of indigenous citizens here. So this is a great book. And we want to welcome Tommy Orange on tomorrow night. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Out.
Yes, thank you. As others mentioned, a lot of terrific events in the community the past several weeks. Obviously, the ACC dinner last night to recognize the career and retirement of now former ACC Commissioner John Swafford. One of my favorite events every year, Friendsgiving, a fundraiser for Greensboro Downtown Parks, Inc., which manages Center City Park and LeBauer Park. But perhaps my most favorite event over the past couple of weeks, Woodley neighborhood really did a terrific event with the support of Council Member Holston and North State Medical Society. My children were able to get their first shot for their vaccine, which was wonderful. My wife, Cora, and I were able to get our booster shots. That kicked my rear end a little bit a few days later, but it feels great to know that we have some additional protection and a layer of protection for our children. So lots of wonderful things, and a special shout out to Councilmember Holston for his contributions to that wonderful event organized by the Woodley neighborhood.
Thank you, Mrs. Hoffman.
I'll just mention the Tanger Center again. I was there Thursday night last week for beautiful, and I sort of do my own little guerrilla marketing when I'm there. Yeah, I'm sitting around the two seats that I have are four couples, three of them from Burlington, and the fourth couple is from Roanoke. So I had chatted with them the night of Wicked, and they had told me where they had dinner. And then so last Thursday night, I said, well, where did you have dinner this time? So they had chosen another downtown restaurant. I would calculate that, 8 people eating at either of those restaurants, the bill could be, $600 to $800 or so. And so they said, we've already made our dinner reservation for the next show. So again, this is just what the Tanger Center is doing for us. And actually, Stephen Tanger made that point in his remarks on Monday night at the donor meeting. And as I said to Zach the night of Wicked, I said, we need 6 more restaurants downtown now. Now that's, opening a restaurant is a major capital investment, so it doesn't happen overnight, but it will happen. And it will happen with other businesses as well. So it was a great weekend with shows and with the donor event and then the ACC event last night. By the way, we had 2 university presidents with us last night for that event, the president of Duke University and the president of Wake Forest. So a really nice crowd.
And the night Gladys Knight's on that midnight train to Georgia.
Yeah, I hate we're missing that.
Yeah, right.
Mrs. Thurm?
Like many of the others, I've been to several events in the past week. It's been a really, really busy week. But just wanted to mention that I had the opportunity today to serve as a panelist representing Greensboro at the National League of Cities Virtual 2021 City Summit. The topic was what COVID-19 tech is here to stay, ensuring equitable service delivery and resident engagement in a more virtual world. It was a really interesting event. It was a great exchange of ideas from cities of many different sizes. And I walked away with not only sharing some of the innovative things that we've done, but picking up some ideas for us going forward that I thought were really unique and interesting. And I'm excited to share those with staff. So thank you very much to the staff people that suggested that I participate. And it was a great event. So thank you. Oh, also thank you for those meetings, the prep meetings with our IT department. It was very helpful.
Thank you. Ms. Abusawader?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll echo everything. The NCCJ citation dinner and our own Betty Cohn received the citation. It was wonderful. Then let's see what else. The Friendsgiving at LeBauer Park. The parks are amazing. The John Swafford retirement dinner and welcoming Jim Phillips. But I do want to say through all of these and the events at the Tanger Center especially, it's just an amazing facility. From the moment you walk into the door to the moment you're in a seat listening to something, it's just fabulous. And they did a wonderful job on catering, making sure everyone felt safe entering, all of those things. It was just fabulous, all the events that have been there in the last couple of weeks. I did want to take just one moment and give an update to council and the community about Crime Stoppers. Since the rewards have been raised, they were raised on September 21st for up to $5,000 from up to $2,000. Well, of course, we wish that we didn't have to have any tips for any crimes because we had no crime, but unfortunately we do. And we live in a day and age where we want to assure the community from Crime Stoppers that they will be anonymous. In 40 years, not one tipster has ever been identified. That means has not been identified to the police, to the community, to anyone. So, but the stats I want to mention are in September and October of 2020 and September, October 2021. And we can only gauge those couple of months because that's when the reward monies went into effect in raising the rewards. So if you take September, October 2020, and you compare it to September, October 2021, tips have increased to Crime Stoppers 31%. That is a huge number. If you take September, October 2020, and again, September, October 2021, in 2020, we only had 9 homicide tips. In 2021, we have already received 25. Not only that, but since the inception of the rewards being raised, we have been able, with the help of the community, the detectives, and the Crime Stoppers staff, solve 3 homicides. And that is amazing. We've never been able to say that we have done something like this. So I just want to thank my colleagues for voting for it, Chief James for bringing it, and the Crime Stoppers Board for bringing it up, that maybe we should ask for that. And, you know, the community for calling in those tips and keep them coming. We will continue to make sure that as many of these crimes or criminal activity or drug activity or anything the community sees, if they can call them in. So thank you, Madam Mayor. That's my remarks for this evening. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Holston.
Yes, and I do apologize for being a little bit duplicative, but it kind of comes with the territory. I will say that, as many have said, the Woodley community really came together on November 6th, and there was food fund, fellowship, they had a walk, and they also had those vaccinations. And it was one of the first locations in Greensboro to vaccinate the kids 5 to 11, and they really did show out. So thank you to all the council members who did show up. That was absolutely wonderful. Next is the NCCJ dinner, which was awesome. It was nice to have that back out of the Corey Center. Some of us did attend with Betty Cohn and others being honored. It was just nice to try to get back, to start getting back. And then finally, you know, we talked about the Tanger Center tonight, and I'm going to continue that conversation. My wife and I have been 4 times now, and it is just a phenomenal facility. But even more than that, it's an economic driver. And I encourage everybody to go see that engine. They're having an open house tomorrow from 2 to 7. It's a public open house. And so we invite everybody to please go and tour the Tanger Center and just see what it's about. See what the future of Greensboro is going to look like as it continues to grow and we continue to drive it. Madam Mayor, that's all I have.
Thank you so much. Hugh, you're right. It's always hard to go towards the end. Everybody has picked a lot of the highlights. I also enjoyed the Woodley Neighborhood Association meeting. It was a lot of fun, and it was good to see different meetings come together. And I appreciate the good discussion and the vaccines and the pickleball and GPD being out there providing food. And it was a great day, and it was a beautiful day in our city. I do want to mention downtown, we've got the Festival of Lights that first Friday in December. I think the Mount Zion Gospel Choir is going to sing. Normally it's A&T, but I don't think they're coming back after Thanksgiving break. That following Saturday is the, I was going to say Macy's Day Parade, but it's the Greensboro Day Parade, but we will have a lot of Macy's style balloons. Do want to remember everybody to shop small. We know that is coming up right after the holidays. Please, Sharon mentioned one of our small businesses downtown that just opened up, Hype Clinic. We've got many great small businesses throughout our entire city. And I hope that everybody will spend a little bit of money in each of them. I do want to recognize Mrs. Hoffman. She was appointed by the governor to the Local Government Commission. Thank you for agreeing to serve in that capacity, and we'll look forward to the information that you bring back. Mr. Holston, I'm going to appoint to the place that Michelle Kennedy had as the liaison to the War Memorial Commission. And there is a new committee that opened up with the MWBE, and I would like to appoint Sharon to that. And I know that Sharon will keep us up to date on everything that's going on MWBE. And we do appreciate her advocacy for all of that. People have talked about Tanger and all the great things that have happened. We've now had some community events I hope people will go through. I think projects like the Tanger Center and like the Aquatics Center show that sometimes you have to go with the gut. Analytics doesn't always do it. When we voted to move forward with the Tanger Center, some of the numbers said maybe we shouldn't do it, but we needed to stand up and show leadership, just like we did with the Aquatic Center. We invested in the Aquatic Center when everybody else was uninvesting because of the economic downturn. And the Aquatic Center has turned out to be one of our greatest economic generators. And the thing is, you're not going to find anybody who will publicly say they were against the Aquatic Center, because it has turned out to be such a great economic boom. And the same will be with Tanger. And that's important because, as Hugh said, we need more restaurants, or Nancy, I think, said we need more restaurants. That means we are investing in small businesses, people who need jobs. We are investing in the Greensboro brand. And I just think that that is so important. People think that the Tanger Center is, just a playground for people who have money. And that truly is not the case. It is an economic generator that is going to put money into our community so we can spend it on other projects. And I think that is one reason why projects like this are so important, and why sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. You're not going to have a spreadsheet with all the numbers on it. You're just going to have to go with your gut and make difficult decisions. And I'm glad that as a council, we were on the right side of both of those decisions. I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. And if we could get a schedule for our meetings going forward in December, as far as what work sessions we have, I know everybody's calendar is getting very busy, and what those topics will be. Mr. City Manager, do you have anything?
Nothing this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. City Attorney?
I have no comment tonight.
Thank you all. I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Buzowater, seconded by Mrs. Johnson, and that passes without objection. Thank you all and have a great holiday.
Thank you.
Thank you.